mention a couple of other things. I want to mention this table right here. I have my whole clan at this table. I've got my oldest daughter, Rebecca. Stand up, please. She's a girl. She's the oldest by 30 minutes. And here's her twin sister, Elizabeth. They were born right when I started my PhD program. But I spent a lot of time in my PhD changing diapers, and I'm really good at it. I still am. But they're two remarkable women. Rebecca, after she graduated from the University of Florida with a degree, and she's an incredible artist, moved to New York City, established herself, and was a finalist for the Teacher of the Year in New York City. Amazing. Elizabeth lost her husband a few years ago to glioblastoma. He served in Iraq. He died in the same thing as Joe Biden. Thank you, Elizabeth. And this is a granddaughter here. And Rebecca moved from New York City to Charlotte to help Elizabeth. Elizabeth is an incredible woman. She spent 2 tours of duty in the Middle East flying P-3s. She remains a captain or a commander in the Navy Reserve and has 3 grandchildren. Rebecca's provided me 2 more grandchildren. I'm still waiting for Katie. Katie, my youngest, is got 2 masters already and is working on her PhD in astrophysics at Johns Hopkins. Here's why I'm here. I couldn't. Everybody loves their kids. I realized a couple of years too. I don't just love them. I really like my daughters. I like spending time with them. So I'm really happy, and I was absolutely delighted when they were all able to be here. It was a lot of logistics, but thank you. And then I've got three of my 5 grandchildren.
Oh yeah, clap for us! Yeah,
You can see they're not shy. That repeats a bunch of times, you know the song. Then it goes. And that goes on a bunch of times. And then it goes. Then there's a guitar break. I'm not going to do it now. We're out like that, and then it goes. Through any more pain. So we'll come back to that in just a second. These are some people that I work with in the Chachi. I've worked with several groups. I'll tell you about them. The Chachi are pretty interesting because they are as much river people as you are people of the forest. And you can see these little kids right along the river. I want to acknowledge some people. I want to acknowledge some academic people. Harley Manor from Bucknell, where I got my undergraduate degree. Ian Prance, we've already heard about Ian Prance from New York Botanical Garden and Leonard Q. We just heard about Dan Austin. Bruce Winterhalter, anthropologist, who I worked with at UNC. He was on my committee. I wasn't doing anthropological work, but a big influence. And finally, Mike Bailey at NYBG. Mike was great. Of all the people I've ever worked, Mike is still one of my closest colleagues, friends, mentors. I can't say enough about Mike Bailey. And then just a few of the people I've worked with. I don't have time to acknowledge all of them. Exist. But Rocio Alapon, some of you know her, with the Quechua. I work with Rocio, we walk into an area that nobody knows us, and the men look at her and start calling her Sachawanami, which means female forest spirit. And we can do anything we want. It's just like instant entree into the community. Here's a Roman we work with, Teresa Watatopo. When I worked with her, she claimed to be 80 years old. Yeah, I thought, right, 80 years old. Her husband claimed to be 100 years old. But when he described the rubber trappers coming up and stealing people to work on rubber plantations, and you dated it, it works out to be 100 years old. Patricia Tarak is a crazy woman, but she was amazing passion for the Chachi people. She was a Peace Corps worker in Ecuador and introduced me to the Chachis. Here's Pedro Anyapa. We also have an age problem with Pedro. We brought Pedro to the US in 1996 to build a Chachi house at Fairchild. He had to get a visa. So we take him into the consulate and they ask all this background information. How old are you? It's like, I don't know. We didn't have birthday parties. He doesn't have a social security number. And this little bureaucrat in the embassy got frustrated. How old are you? I don't know. I can't remember. He said, how old do you want to be? And so he said, 35. So he just shaved 20 years off his life, probably. So any of you want an aging process, I'll tell you who to talk to. Then the Schwartz people down here, this is Agatha Antich and her son-in-law, Juan Cristobal Antosh, and his daughter. I love this in a couple ways, this little picture down here, because I see 3 generations of the Schwartz. And so Juan's daughter and Juan are learning from his mother-in-law while I'm asking questions. I wish I had a picture 2 seconds from now, from this picture, because Agatha turned around and punched Juan in the face. And she punched him because I'd ask a question. I'd ask, is this whatever Schwartz planet was? And he says, no, it's not. And she turned around and slugged him and says, how come the gringo knows the name of them and you don't know the name of them? How are children going to learn? These are Seminoles, but they're not a picture I took. This is a picture my dad took in 1965. I've done some work with the Seminole tribe too. This is because of Gail Wagner. Gail got everybody interested in academic genealogies. So I went and traced mine, and where's Mark? Where's Mark Merlin? So we have a lineage over here with John Street. And John Street was Mark's major advisor, was Harley Manor's major advisor, who was my advisor at Bucknell. Yeah. Dan Austin at FAU then was a student of Walter Lewis, who we all know. Richie Bell, and this lineage goes all the way back to Linnaeus, if you wanted. I just cut it off. And then over here we have Mike Balick and Richard Evan Schultes. Now here's some of my students. Some of them you know, many of them are here. Bruce Hoffman was a master's student with me. Bruce, where are you? Right here. think he's done really fairly well. Wouldn't you say? You heard us talk. Michael Thomas, I was on his PhD committee. Michael is right over here. Maria Fadiman, I was on her. Maria took a course with me in Panama, and I also was on her committee. Maria, where are you at? And then somebody named Quave. Have you heard of her? I list some of the awards, and my students have done very well. I had to abbreviate it, of course, with Cassandra because she won them all. And we could have had 2 or 3 slides with just the awards that she won. So I thank all my students. I enjoyed all of you, and I learned a lot from you. So the songs, I was going to go through this more, but in the interest of time, I cut them out. Why mandolin is not it's a recent instrument. I just picked that up over COVID. I play a bunch of other stuff, but I just picked that up. So I apologize for making you go through that. But the first was a set after Martin Hayes. The songs were written in the 1800s. There's 3 reels. The last one was repeated. The second, I hope there are no cello players in here because I butchered part of the cello suite. And the last, of course, was a Stairway to Heaven. We'll come back to all this in a minute. Now, I've asked several, it's been a pleasure for me to be here at this meeting. I haven't been to as many meetings in the last few years as I have. I attended 19 meetings in a row, SCB meetings in a row, starting in 1992. I was at a couple before that, and then 19 in a row. As they say, I was born at a very young age. And you can see, if you look at the very picture up there, you can see my dad holding me. There's a plant in the background. And here I am teeing out plants. I also have a couple plants here. And fishing right here was a plant for bait and camping. And then my kids. These are my older daughters right here. And they were out in nature. And here is Katie at a young age. So I asked some of the young people that I met here today, this is a little disheartening to me, it has nothing to do with them. Why are you interested in what you do? Why are you interested in plants? None of them told me because it's a course I took in college. Nothing I can do. It's always something that started down here. It started earlier, far before I get them. So had to choose a career, right? So, well, first thing I wanted to be Jacques Cousteau. I grew up in South Florida. I loved to go diving. And I got to college. We actually read papers as undergraduate in college. So I look up Jacques Cousteau, and there are no papers. There's one scientific publication for Jacques Cousteau, and that's on the invention of the aqualung, scuba. So then I started about pro water skier, maybe he'll be an angler, maybe he'll be a pro football player, how about a flat-picking guitarist, a carpenter, singer-songwriter. Those are all things I considered, but for various reasons, none of them worked out. Yeah, I fell there. Look at this little guy. He catches the fish 3 times bigger than I did. Now, Bucknell, I played football. Bucknell did beat the University of Miami, soundly 26-0. The only problem, that was 1935 in the very first Orange Bowl, long before I played for Bucknell. So there was no possibility for a pro football career. I want you to look over at the picture over here. Look at Tony Rice's, look at Tony Rice's fingers. Look how long those are. Look at my fingers. Tony Rice, when he plays the card, it looks like crabs mating, and I'm I did build a lot of stuff. I poured the slab for that house, built the trusses, rebuilt the farmhouse. I was a layout carpenter and that. I'm not that great at carpentry, but the only reason I was a layout carpenter is because I could read plans. My dad was an architect. I learned to read plans when I was 4. This is my house I rebuilt after Hurricane Andrew. Right when I was putting on this roof, this was 1993, I get a call from Mike Bailey. Said, hey, could you host the SCB meeting? I said, yeah, sure, I'll be interested to do that. When? He said, about 4 months from now. And the person who was planning to host it couldn't, Julia Morton, because of the damage to her house. So I had to put together a meeting in 4 months. That was fun. but I did it. And then how about a singer-songwriter? I've written a bunch of stuff. I don't want to do the Paxton song. Paxton doesn't like it, but I did write one hymn. Here's one. It's the Clapton's Caffeine. If you want to wake up, you got to fill up your cup, caffeine. Now, I wrote that, and you know the song. I wrote that because I had a colleague who outlawed coffee in his class, and I just thought it was abhorrent. So, and plus, you know, in college, you can't advocate cocaine, but you can't advocate caffeine. So we changed that around. There are a whole bunch of others. You know, there's the Mr. Prentice guy to Mr. American Pie about, you know, our former president, but none of those have really caught on. So I became, nothing left to do, right? So I became an ethnobotanist. And that was an accident. I didn't start off as an ethnobotanist. I started off looking at the ecology of vascular epiphytes. Some papers I did. Went to Peru to work for an anthropologist who needed somebody to work on the vegetation there. And it really was a total accident that I became an ethnobotanist. As I was collecting plants in the high Andes, a wonderful ethnobotanical laboratory, kids would come up. They saw I was collecting new specimens. They'd run up to me and throw plants down and call out the names and the uses. So I put aside what I was doing and started recording some information. And the rest is history. I became an ethnobotanist. There's where I lived up here in the shore, with the shore for a long time. Here's some of the shore kids. This was some of the work with the shore that was recognized by the Klinger Award. It was written up in Details magazine. Now, Woody got the cover. I got the middle of the magazine right there. But I still got hair, and Woody don't. So I guess there is justice. So I could talk a lot about plant use. This is just some of the things, like this is, oops, I call this my Ecuadorian Gothic. This is actually pretty cool. Both use and management. This palm, Aphandra, is overrepresented because people, the way it's managed. Youyou is the heliconia. It's used to help ferment chicha. And it has microbes that grows on it. So when you cover the pot, it helps to ferment. And Youyou, I'll talk a little bit more about that. Down here, we have a plant that's used to feed coolies, which are guinea pig, which are considered a delicacy. Now, have you ever seen the Flintstones where they have like a garbage disposal, some animal that just kind of chews all the food up? It's exactly what the shore do. They have a table where they prepare food with a hole in it. And as they chop things up, they just break it down that hole. The coolies eat it. Have you ever heard about the Flintstones in an ethnobiology meeting? Write a whole paper about Carlodovica palmata, Panama hat palm. One of the early meetings I went to was the Hawaii meeting in 1992. I was in the Royal Hawaiian Hotel with Mike Balick and Paul Cox. I just written this paper. Paul went in and picked up a Panama hat, and he put it on his head, kind of forcing it down, and the clerk was apoplectic. I thought, like, chill out, dude. You know, he's just trying on the hat. Till Paul flipped it over. There was a price tag, 1992, $2,500 for the hat. That's why it was. And then some of the seminal plant use, but I'm not going to talk about that. So why did I bring this mandolin? The mandolin to make an analogy. So what can't be played on the mandolin? Well, if you're good, you can play any kind of music. There's no limit. We associate it with something else. So you might think of it as bluegrass, you know, or maybe Neopolitan music, but you can play any kind of music you want to. We can turn a corner. What isn't ethnobotany? Not much. Heard of plant-blindness? I have just the opposite. I see plants everywhere. Think about, someday I'll write a paper about the ethnobotany of a submarine. You think, where are there fewer plants than on a nuclear submarine? This is USS West Virginia, Virginia-class New Mexico, a Virginia-class submarine, $3 billion. I had a tour of this in the conning tower. They have chairs. Every chair had a tennis ball made of rubber on each leg of the chair to abate noise. I just thought about this again. What do we have? Right here we have lines, most likely made of hemp. And then the things that cover the submarine, anechoic tiles that are made of natural rubber. The bottom line, it doesn't matter where you go. There are plants there and people are using them. It doesn't matter what culture you're working with. It could be a traditional culture, it could be a modern culture. Plants are being utilized. So even something like this is ethnobotany. So I wrote a paper about the sound of music. If you're not a carpenter or luthier, you don't think about wood. If you are, you know that there's different woods for each different applications. So for each different part of a musical instrument, this could be a mandolin, a guitar, a piano, doesn't matter. There are different woods, and you can predict their uses based on two factors, the modulus of elasticity, which is a measure of the stress-strain ratio, and the wood density. So we're not going to go into that, but you can see how they're used. So plants are everywhere. These are just some things I use in teaching. Artificial leaf now that we have, and photosynthesis to produce syngas, methane, and other things that then can be converted downstream into lots of things. Barry Bonds and his 762 home runs. It's an ethnobotanical problem. I'll explain that more in a second. This is an interesting picture. This is from a movie called They Were Expendable up here. John Ford was the director. This is one of the last scenes in the movie. And this is the last plane to leave Corregidor in the Philippines. People who were left behind were essentially sentenced to death. There was a famous Bataan death march where 20,000 of the 80,000 people died. And there were, in the movie, there were two officers that were bumped off the plane, and in their place there were two junior officers that were put on for their particular expertise. That's fiction. The reality is that an officer, a junior officer, was bumped off the last plane, and in his seat went cinchona, went to produce quinine, because it was seen as essential to the war effort. You know, several historians writing about World War II write about expenditures for research, and they've said more money was spent on, the most money that was spent on research was the Manhattan Project. And number two was the cinchona mission, to find sources or artificial varieties of quinine. That was how important that was. I used to watch this as a kid, and I thought, wow, the Philippines really looked like Florida. And the reason it was filmed in Florida. So some of you on the SAB Council have been to the Kampong. So the Kampong is right over there, and this is the lighthouse on Key Biscayne. Other things is Vincent art. Art is botanical. Here's my artist's daughter. So you think about that. Painting over there by Van Gogh. First of all, there's a substrate on which the paint adheres. It can be canvas, it can be wood, it can be linen. There's paint. Paint has pigments in it, many from plants, some minerals, but many from plants. The substrate that disperses it, linseed oil, often. This particular one, some people argue that Van Gogh's obsession with yellow is because he was being treated by his physician, shown in this painting, which was painted by Van Gogh, with digitalis, which produces xanthophasia, this bias toward yellow. Talk about economic botany. Anybody got $18 million for a violin? That all relates to the wood, the nature of the wood. People used to think it was the varnish, maybe the way it was constructed. No, it's the wood. Why are we here? Because the British lost it, the Battle of the Chesapeake. during the Yorktown campaign. Why did the British lose? Because they didn't have enough ships of the line. Why couldn't they produce ships of the line? Because they used up all of their oak trees. They had a naval preserve that was down to 400 oak trees. It takes 4,000 to 6,000 oaks to build a ship of the line. Immediately after the war, John Quincy Adams started the live oak reserve because he understood how important that was to the war, to the young United States. I'm going to skip this because we're short on time. The Great Phenol Plot, this is a great one. Phenol is also from coal tar, also produced in Scotch fermentation. During World War II, Germans lost access to phenol that they used for one to produce aspirin, bare aspirin. So they went to the US and they started buying it. Thomas Edison was producing 12 tons of this a day, and a German agent was buying 25% of that until it was exposed by the Secret Service. Now, it wasn't illegal. We were a neutral country, but when it was published in an anti-German paper, that put a stop to that export. Here's why it was important. And this is actually a general theme for botany. Often we see, oh, that molecule doesn't really do what we want it to do. It's a neat molecule, but it doesn't work. Well, that doesn't matter. What can you do with that molecule? There are gateway molecules that can turn into lots of other things. So you can make records. That's why Edison wanted it. You can nitrate it and make explosives. That's why the Germans wanted it, but they pretended like they wanted it to make aspirin. Now, we don't know if this is going to work. I'll try. Well, I'm going to skip this. I want you to go home after this. I want you to find Daniel Barenbaum's treatment of Beethoven's Piano Sonata number 17. Go to 11:30 and listen to it. And what you'll find at 11:30, very faintly, you'll hear the theme of the Flintstones. That's where it came from. So the point here is there's nothing new. It's already been done. Nothing new. It's already been done. So why are you here? I'll tell you. Oh, the other one, this is why I picked out this. There's actually a lawsuit. Led Zeppelin was sued by a group called Taurus for copyright infringement. Well, they were all about 400 years too late. The song, if you listen to this, I'm not going to pick up the mandolin down, the song called Molly McAlpin, a classic Irish tune, it's Stairway to Heaven. It was written in 1600s. You want to be a rock star or what? Go read old music and just change the chord structure around a little bit. All right, nothing new. So let's look at the doctrine of signatures. Here's what people wrote about it. Entirely wrong, pseudoscientific, false tenet, no scientific basis, far-fetched, seems absurd. So I wrote a paper on it, right? Totally debunked. And I got to thinking about this when I saw this plant right here. As soon as the Quechua brought this to me, I knew exactly what they were going to tell me. They call it pucapanga, which means red leaf. So they brought it to me. Does this have any use? Oh yeah, it's used to treat abnormal menstrual bleeding. I knew they were going to say that. And then they said it's used to treat snake bite. So yeah, right, doctrine of signatures, right. Until I went to the other side of the Andes, found another genus of Columnia, asked the Chachi, what do you use this for? Oh, we use it to treat abnormal menstrual bleeding, and we use it to treat snake bite. There's been no exchange, no diffusion. That was an independent discovery. The only thing different, the Chachi plant didn't have any red on the leaf. I thought, wait, what's going on? No doctrine here. So if you're interested, you can read more detail in a couple of papers. There's a lot been written. I wrote a paper in Herbalgram as well. There are several references in the journal in Economic Botany. It's manifest in Kabakar, medicinal plants. Less promising pharmacological leads. People said if you find a plant that has a signature, it's probably not going to be any good in Cassandra's lab. And then heart-shaped Melissa officinalis leaves are used for heart weakness. Now, does that look like a heart? It doesn't even look like a Valentine heart. And of course, a Valentine heart doesn't look like anything like the thing that's inside you or inside me. So what's that really mean when it comes to signatures? Again, we can look at, and here's a basic problem. This is something Dioscorides wrote, and he in 1500 BC. The herb Scorpius, which is shown here, resembles the tail of a scorpion and is good against his biting. And does not mean and, comma, therefore is. Commas are important. Think about the Second Amendment. If we'd had a comma, we might have less problems. Okay, so what that is, it's a fallacy, a logical fallacy. It's called post hoc ergo propter hoc. After that, therefore, because of that, it's cause and effect. So my argument there is that signatures are always post hoc. They're added after the fact, usually by the researcher, not the people using the plants. And more important, signatures are important though, because they're mnemonics. They're ways of remembering things in pre-literate societies. So they have their value, not in discovery, but in remembering plants. That's why they're important. There was a paper that came out in a new journal by the American Chemical Society called Science Central, and it was looking at Carl Djerasi's efforts in the development of birth control. We all can agree birth control was a monumental advancement in modern culture. And I'm going to, this is the marker degradation. Marker was a remarkable chemist who showed that you could do what everybody thought you couldn't do. Marker degradation, you take these precursors, these sapogenins in plants, and in 3 steps you can create a cortisone precursor. Pretty amazing. But in the paper, they don't talk anything about plants. They're really, sorry, piss me off, right? What about the plants that were involved? So the paper talks about progesterone as a poor oral contraceptive. That wasn't the goal of any of the research. Plants don't make saponins, not progesterone. And even Djerasi's own words talk about an acknowledged marker. And also there's no mention of sisal. In fact, nobody ever talks about sisal in the role. This was completely fortuitous because you can get the same saponins from sisal. Sisal was already being produced. So when you make sisal for fibers, you scrape away the mesophyll and throw that away and you get the fibers. Well, that mesophyll is full of the things you need to make cortisone. So everybody missed the boat on that one. How many of you heard this? 3 species feed the world. Corn, wheat, and rice, lots of it. We repeat that. We repeat all sorts of things, like 80% of the world's population depends on medicinal plants. And it sounds good to us, so we quote it. 1% of the world's plants are medicinal, or 2%, or 10%, or 15%, it doesn't matter what percentage. For all of those, there's no reasoning behind it. There's no science or no statistics behind it. And this is repeated, Maria, in National Geographic in a recent publication by PNAS. So this is something I just did for class I was teaching. The data is available. Everybody cites FAO, but FAO is looking at production. Production is not consumption, right? So you produce a lot of, and things switch. So sugarcane's moved up to the #1 crop. Now, what do you do with sugarcane? You make ethanol out of it. A lot of corn goes to ethanol or starch, not consuming. So what we have is rice is #1. Rice is really important, that's right. Wheat is important. Then sugarcane is #2, but not really contributing much. Then corn, then soy, then potatoes. But then it takes 140 other crops to get up to that amount. So totally bogus what we've heard all this time. We saw a similar picture like this, nothing new. We'll look at the patterns of medicinal plant use. Now, this is Dan Moorman's approach. I love Dan. Dan is great. Go thank Dan. We would not be here without Dan Moorman. Dan saved the society. When I became president, the journal was in terrible shape. We had an editor who was unresponsive, kind of as a lark in a meeting in London, or in England, or in Cambridge, somewhere I forgot. I said, hey, Dan, how'd you like to be editor? Thinking he'd say no. He said, well, I'll think about it. And he took us up and he helped us out tremendously. Only problem, this is totally wrong. If you look at this, medicinal species regressed against total species. So total species has two parts, right? It has medicinal species in it as well as non-medicinal species. So X and Y are not independent. So Chad Husby and I, who has a former student at FIU, came up with another approach that you can use to analyze that. When you do, you find there's a few plants families that are overrepresented, not many, and a few under. But most things are sampled proportional to their abundance. Totally different than what we think in the past. The name really does matter. The name really does matter. Pay attention. It's so easy now to be a good taxonomist. Mike Balick and I were on an NIH panel. We were reviewing proposals that were $7.5 million apiece. Mike was recused for one of them. And when he went out, I was pointing out the taxonomic errors, and the chair of the panel stood up and he said, what's wrong with you, botanists? You know, you're not happy with anything here. Does the name really matter of the plant? Does the name really matter? And I was just livid. Everybody jumped up. 50 people I had jumping up down my throat. Woman next to me says, yeah, I'm a chemist. I'm from the islands. We have different names for all our plants. People went on like that. And I just sat grabbing it. Finally, I turned to her. I said, well, is it an alkyne, an alkene, or an alkane? It doesn't really matter, right? They're just names. You turn the chair. Well, it doesn't really matter if it's a Y-star rat, if it's knockout rat. You know, those are just names. Oh, yeah, of course it does. They were like, hey, of course it matters. Well, it turns out the proposal wanted to look at Anis commosis. What is that? What they meant to write there? Oh, come on, botanist. They left out two letters, Ananis commosa. And they said, we've got great preliminary data, and then nothing's ever been done on these things. That's right, you can't find anything, you just spelled it wrong. ANAS is a genus for mallard and wood duck. So yeah, if you stick a wood duck in a blender and see if you can get any results from that. This shows the importance. This is Richard Gill at New York, who worked with people at New York Botanical Garden. This, by the way, is A.C. Smith, who said, what's the difference between economic and botany and ethnobotany? Economic botany is just ethnobotany with a financial incentive. Said that in 1996. Now, let's go to history of curare, described first by Europeans in 1540, 400 years before the botanical connections were made, 400 years. But in 1938, because of the Gill expedition, there was a vouchered specimen. A year later, a drug was developed. 2 years later, it went into testing, which led to balanced anesthesia. Look at the publication rate down there from PubMed. 1 to 12 publications until 1946. It took a lag time because of World War II. After that, it just skyrocketed, all because they finally knew what the species was. And they still didn't get it right in literature. The chemists don't believe what chemists write about plants. Of course, the chemists don't believe what I write about chemistry. It's fair. They said, the chemist who described the specimen said that only one species was used. That's false. The plant was identified by a botanist in the field. That was false. There were herbarium specimens. They had one right. And then it was identified by botanists at the Bronx Botanical Garden. Oops, wrong garden, fellas, wrong bureau of New York. Finally, a couple more things and I'll finish up. The improbable. When I saw this GIF right here, I figured, I told you, I presented this in St. Louis a few years ago. I said, I got to figure out some way to use this in a paper. No, it wasn't. So this was like a gift. Driving science, so I came up with that. And the bottom line is that people give psychoactive substances to their hunting dogs. It sounds like I'm making this up, right? You give I call it a reefer for Rover project, yeah. It doesn't make sense to give psychoactives intuitively to your hunting animals, but people do it. Well, it turns out here's what's happening, and I'm not going to tell you all about it here. Sensory gating. We know that what happens on some hallucinogens block certain sensations. So what these psychoactives are doing in dogs are blocking extraneous things and most likely increasing their olfactory cues to make them better hunters. People who don't successfully hunt in the rainforest die. They don't have protein. So it doesn't sound real, but it is. There's the obvious. The bottom line here is a plant that I wrote with Ian Prance. A plant that is more versatile, one that has more pharmacological properties and is used to treat a greater number of body systems, has a higher versatility and is more likely to be used than one that isn't, right? That's not earth-shattering, it's obvious, but nobody wrote about this. And this has led to the versatility hypothesis in plant selection. So some of the things I've done, here's a SC, we saw the hammer, right, the gavel this morning. Here's where the gavel started, one of the early meetings. Dan Moorman, Walter Lewis, Gail Wagner, and then David Lentz, myself at the Shanghai meeting. The book that I wrote on the shore, I brought back to the shore. We had a really kind of business relationship. Pedro Cancumas was never very open. But when I brought this book back to him, he was happy to work with me, but it wasn't like I'd be away for a while and come back. It wasn't like, oh, great, you're here. It's just, okay, when do you want to work? I gave him this book. He cried. He said, my people don't have anything like this. My children don't remember any of the medicines. Now we'll have it for future generations. Did work for the Seminole tribe, and if you ever go to the Atatiki Museum, you can see that. A lot of teaching in the courses. This is a course in Ecuador. This is actually Maria took this, thank you. Maria came with me at my class at Jonathan Dickinson's State Park in Florida. I've taught in Ecuador, Peru, Bahamas, Florida, North Carolina. And the Chachi House was a neat project. There's Katie. Katie, stand up now. She's a little bit bigger, stand up. So my kids have been around plants a lot. And there's a lot more, but some other time. I can talk about new hallucinogen that we discovered right over here. Chocolatio, this was described by an anthropologist in 1925. Where does it grow? On the Rio Caiapas. So you go up the Rio Caiapas. Hey, where's Chocolatio? You know that? Oh yeah, it grows a poco más abajo, a little bit higher. Go up higher. You know Chocolatio? Oh yeah, it grows a poco más abajo, you know, so you go up and down. And a poco más abajo, a little lower, can be 50 yards, 50 kilometers, depending on who you are. But we eventually figured out what it was. Firewood selection, there's a rational reason for selecting firewood. This is a paper I wrote and submitted to the journal. The former editor didn't even want to review it. He didn't think it was interesting at all. But if you look at how people select fuel is totally rational. You can predict it based on the same categories that we've seen in the past, based on the density, which is correlated with fuel value, and the modulus of elasticity. So we'll talk about this some other time. Time to go fishing now. Thank you.